In November 1979, while the Muslim world was preparing for the dawn prayers of a new Islamic century, something unthinkable happened in the heart of Islam itself. Gunfire echoed inside the Grand Mosque of Mecca, worshippers screamed and ran for cover. Blood spilled on marble floors that had never known violence. Islam's holiest site, a place forbidden to weapons and war for over 1,000 years, was suddenly transformed into a battlefield. For Saudi Arabia and for the Muslim world, it was a shock so profound that its consequences are still unfolding today. The attack did not come from foreign invaders or outside enemies, it came from within. The Grand Mosque, known as Masjid al-Haram, surrounds the Kaaba, the spiritual center toward which Muslims around the world pray. It is a place where violence is strictly forbidden, where even arguments are considered sinful. Yet on that morning, a group of heavily armed militants sealed its gates, took thousands of worshippers hostage, and declared that the Saudi state had lost its religious legitimacy. At the center of this uprising was Juhayman al-Otaybi, a former member of the Saudi National Guard. He was not an outsider or a revolutionary from the margins. He came from within the system, deeply familiar with the religious and political foundations of the kingdom. His followers believed that Saudi Arabia had betrayed Islam by embracing Western influence, wealth, and modernity. To them, the royal family had become corrupt, sinful, and illegitimate. Juhayman and his followers believed they were living in the end times. They declared that one of their own was the Mahdi, the prophesied redeemer in Islamic tradition who would appear before the day of judgment to restore justice and true faith. This belief gave their actions a terrifying certainty. They were not negotiating, they were fulfilling destiny. As the militants took control of the mosque, chaos spread through Mecca. Saudi security forces were stunned. No one had planned for an attack inside the Grand Mosque. The very idea was almost impossible to imagine. Weapons were smuggled and disguised as coffins, hidden beneath the rituals of pilgrimage. When the shooting started, many worshippers were trapped, unable to escape. For the Saudi monarchy, the situation was existential. Saudi Arabia's legitimacy rests on two pillars: control of the holy sites and an alliance with religious authority. Losing the Grand Mosque, even temporarily, was more than a security failure. It was a direct challenge to the state's right to rule. Worse still, Islamic law strictly forbids violence in Mecca. Any attempt to retake the mosque risked being seen as sacrilege. For days, confusion reigned. Saudi forces attempted assaults but were driven back. The militants knew the complex underground passages beneath the mosque. They used snipers, booby traps, and hostages to hold their ground. The siege dragged on, turning sacred space into a killing zone. The monarchy faced an impossible dilemma: do nothing and appear weak and illegitimate, act forcefully and risk violating the sanctity of Islam's holiest place. The solution came through religion itself. Saudi leaders sought and obtained a religious fatwa declaring that the militants were heretics and that force could be used against them. Only with this religious cover could the state proceed. The fight to retake the mosque became framed not as violence but as purification. Even then, Saudi forces struggled. The militants were fanatical, prepared to die, and deeply entrenched. The battle moved into underground chambers where tear gas and conventional tactics failed. At this point, the kingdom turned quietly to outside help. Despite strict rules forbidding non-Muslims from entering Mecca, Saudi Arabia sought clandestine assistance from French counterterrorism specialists linked to GIGN. Officially, they did not fight. Unofficially, they provided critical technical support and guidance on how to flush militants from enclosed spaces. After 15 days of brutal combat, the siege was finally broken. The cost was staggering. Hundreds were killed, including hostages, soldiers, and militants. The survivors emerged traumatized. The bodies were removed quietly. The blood was washed away. Official information was tightly controlled. The Saudi state wanted the world to forget what had happened as quickly as possible. But the damage was already done. The siege of Mecca shattered the illusion of stability inside Saudi Arabia. It exposed deep religious anger within the kingdom itself, and it terrified the royal family into believing that their greatest threat did not come from foreign enemies, but from Islamist radicalism at home. The response was not liberalization, it was the opposite. In the years that followed, Saudi Arabia entered a period of extreme religious conservatism. The monarchy tightened its alliance with hardline clerics, social freedoms were rolled back. Music, cinema, women's public roles, and cultural expression were heavily restricted. The religious police gained immense power. The message was clear: the state would prove its Islamic purity by becoming more conservative, not less. This decision had global consequences. Saudi Arabia began exporting its strict interpretation of Islam abroad, funding mosques, schools, and religious institutions across the world. What began as an internal crisis response became an international force shaping religious discourse from Asia to Africa to Europe. At the same time, the siege became a template. Juhayman failed militarily, but his ideas survived. The notion that armed action could purify Islam, that holy spaces could be weaponized, and that regimes could be challenged through religious absolutism did not die in Mecca, they spread. Later extremist movements would echo the same themes: rejection of Western influence, hostility to existing Muslim governments, obsession with end-times prophecy, and willingness to commit mass violence in the name of faith. In this sense, the siege of Mecca became the Big Bang of modern Islamist terrorism. It showed that religious symbolism could be turned into a strategic weapon. It forced states to respond by choosing repression or radical accommodation, and it reshaped the balance between religion and power in the Muslim world. For Saudi Arabia, the trauma lingered silently. The kingdom survived, but at the cost of decades of tightened control and exported extremism. Only many years later would it begin cautiously reversing some of those policies under the shadow of a history that still haunts it. The Grand Mosque stands today as it always has, filled with pilgrims, prayer, and peace. Most visitors never think about the blood once spilled there. But the echoes of November 1979 are still present, not in the stones, but in the political and religious currents that continue to shape global conflict. What happened in Mecca was not just a siege. It was a turning point, a moment when sacred space collided with modern extremism, and the world quietly changed direction.